Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld senior editor, Keith Raynor. And hey, check us out on YouTube. If you're a longtime listener and you enjoy watching your podcasts instead of just listening to them, we are now on YouTube every week, and you can, watch us talk from our home studios.
And since we're on YouTube, we're literally contractually obligated to say smash that subscribe button and the like button, the like goal for this video. Yeah, hit the bell for notifications. Yeah, you want to be part of the Nudie gang. So that's we have to say that, or else they'll remove us from the platform. That's
right. We'll get canceled off of the platform. So a big show today. We got a really big show. We are going to be talking with Tim DeByle from the AUDL about their return to play plan. They've announced a season that's set to start on June 5th. That's not too long from now. That's less than 3 months from now. And just yesterday, news came out from USA Ultimate as they announced plans for what they're expecting to do this club season with the other summer tournaments, Masters, YCCs, the whole deal. So lots to get to today. In our subscriber bonus segment today, we're going to talk about the Premier Ultimate League. There was, to put it lightly, some social media drama over the weekend, and the league kind of in the spotlight right now for what their return to play plan is. We're going to discuss in our subscriber bonus segment. But first up, let's talk about this USA Ultimate announcement from this week. Go ahead.
Is that Ultimate's music I hear? Is Ultimate back? Oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like you're really burying the lead on Ultimate may actually be literally back.
I mean, let's lay out the simple facts here. USA Ultimate is planning for a full season of Club Ultimate, including all of the major Triple Crown Tour events, and the season is set to start in June. Pro Elite Challenge on the calendar in early July. The Select Flight tournaments. US Open early August. Elite Select Challenge mid-August. Pro Championships September 4th through 6th. Sectionals, Regionals, Nationals in San Diego. So, as it stands today, on March 10th, they're planning for a full season. They're planning to have YCCs. They're going to have Masters Nationals. They're still planning to have the College Fall Series. So, there are no cancellations being announced right now. What this actually means for whether these tournaments take place or not, I think is still TBD, Keith. But, let's just take this announcement at face value. What's your reaction to what you saw yesterday?
Hallelujah. It's hard to say, I think, why exactly this is so different from the previous kind of announcements of you remember we were kind of in this phase of we're not canceling this event, so it could happen, but it never felt like those events were realistically going to happen. It was just We haven't canceled them yet. And this feels like these are events that we actually think might happen. And to me, that just feels like it's context in which these events have been announced that's so different. It actually feels like there's been kind of a turning of the tide as far as how comfortable people are with playing outdoor sports. We've had the vaccine rollout, which is in the midst of happening and hopefully will continue to get better. So there's signs of actual hope that we can compete, and then there's a plan in place for us to do that. And I just hope that you've started looking for a place for Team Multiworld to stay in San Diego.
I can't say that I've done that quite yet. It's actually probably a good time to think about it. I should really do that. I honestly should do that, because if there's refundable, flexible cancellation policies, now's probably a good time to book, since other people maybe aren't thinking about it yet. But hey, teams, don't steal this from me. But yeah, so here's some other background here. Events are going to be confirmed 6 weeks prior to when they're set to take place. So, and that'll be kind of on a rolling basis. So there's a possibility that, those July events get canceled, or that the season gets postponed to start instead of in June, starts in July or starts in August. Or maybe they cancel the whole regular season, but they still try to have the postseason. Obviously, a lot is going to depend on vaccination progress, case rates, what players, are saying that they want to do. You can have a big tournament in July. Are teams going to sign up to go and fly to Denver? Maybe. I don't really know. I think it's a little early to really say. USA Ultimate will not be doing rankings this season because they don't want to, the attendance is not going to be mandated at any of these events like in a typical year. So, the US Open isn't going to require the top 4 teams from the previous year's nationals to go. And so they're not going to have rankings. They don't want to put pressure on teams to attend events.
And in addition, with no rankings, there's a concern about a lack of connectivity that would render the rankings fairly ineffective as far as actually evaluating team strength.
If all of play is regional, then how do you really have true rankings? I mean, you don't.
Right.
And so what that means for the qualification process for nationals has not yet been decided. I mean, we asked Will Deaver if they were going to consider expanding to 24 teams last week on the show. Kind of didn't have much to say. I've talked to some folks at USAU. That has not been discussed, but it doesn't mean that it won't be discussed. I don't really know how else you do it. Besides, you could rely on 2019. We've discussed many scenarios for how you might allocate bids in a year when you can't do it based on the competitive play on the field. But at the end of the day, USAU is signaling very clearly that they think that events can safely happen this summer.
Indeed. And I'll be curious to see what the response is going to be like from local organizers, because while this schedule lays out, the tentpole events that will probably be more regional than usual, but are the most likely to have kind of a national attendance, the rest of the meat of the season is carried by regional events. And those are organized by other tournament organizers. And I'll be curious to see how those events proceed with this information. I imagine that, organizers have been planning, but now are really into, okay, there's a season structure here. There's an incentive for teams to attend, like there's interest. So, this is what we've been waiting for, I think, in a lot of ways from USA Ultimate to kind of take the lead, because this, I think, triggers other organizations to feel more confident that they can organize events and have participation. So I'll be curious to see kind of what the next steps are for the tournaments that aren't on this list that USA Ultimate isn't running, because I think that's going to kind of tie the room together for actual club participation.
And at some point, I mean, I've seen less of this from this release, but I've still seen some people saying, this is irresponsible for them to be announcing it. How is it irresponsible? Vaccination progress by June, or let's say July, when these events are scheduled, the first events are scheduled to take place on sort of a national basis, should be significant by then. I mean, anybody who wants a vaccine should, as we understand it today, be able to get one by July. So at what point do we get to say we can start doing things again? I mean, in my mind, this is totally appropriate from USA Ultimate, and saying, we're going to have a lot of flexibility. Maybe we'll cancel if we need to. That's totally fine. As high risk people get vaccinated, which many of them have already been vaccinated over the last 3 months, the general risk of COVID continues to drop every day. So I think that it's very realistic that by summer, it will be reasonable to do things. Will there be people who don't want to play because they don't feel like the risk is worth taking for them? I do think that's true. I'm sure that will apply to some people. The thing is, a lot of people want to play. And I think giving them an opportunity to be able to play when you're in a position where, in theory, vaccinations have taken place with 60, 70% of the population, that seems like that's the entire point of everybody getting vaccinated, so we can start to resume normal lives.
To be fair to the community, I do think that the calls of judgment have died down a bit from
Definitely.
Where they were 4 or 6 months ago or whatnot. So I think before there was kind of this really strong counterpoint to should we even consider playing, and it got a bit extreme. But I think mostly that has died down. I mean, we ran a poll on Ulti World's Twitter. If events can safely take place, will you play Club Ultimate this season? And 60%, just under 60% of the respondents, of which there were like 900, said yes. Now, about 25% of those people replied just to show the results are not applicable. So, take that with a grain of salt, but that's still a pretty overwhelming yes over no ratio.
Yeah. I mean, if you look just at the yes-no ratio, it was about 80-20.
So,
and, make of that what you will. I think it totally unscientific. What does that no group represent? Is that, people who weren't going to play club anyway? I mean, who knows?
Oh, you're not submitting this as peer-reviewed data to
no, but
sports journals?
You seeing like clear majorities saying we want to play, and obviously, if events can take place safely is a gigantic question mark still on March 10th. But I think that if you look at the realistic projections and think about the relative safety of playing outdoor sports, it's entirely realistic that we're going to have a full club season. I don't expect it to look like a normal club season in the sense of having tons of teams flying into big tournaments. That's probably going to be one of the absolute last things to come back. But I do think that regional tournaments are going to start to take place, and leagues are going to come back online, and now it's just a matter of when as opposed to if.
Yeah, the when and the how. What does it actually look like? I'm hoping still for kind of a celebratory environment when we're back. A safe one. It's still a mindful one, but I'm ready for this club season to not necessarily be taken with the same attitudes that were pervasive in other club seasons as far as the level of competitiveness. Like for me, this year will be something of like, let's get back to playing Ultimate and enjoying each other's company and the things that we enjoy about being around each other and in this community and in playing this game, more than it'll be about like, let's find out who the best team is. Because I think that the given structure that we have, the constraints that we have are going to make it pretty difficult to fairly assess who that is. So why place so much weight on that? Like, will we still care about how people are playing and who's winning games? Of course, that's part of competition. But I don't think we're going to walk away from this club season being like, oh, this champion has proven everything they need to prove.
Yeah. The whoever wins the title this year, I think you have to consider that it may not feel like quite the same thing. I mean, it's just practices are probably going to be limited for the foreseeable future. Will teams even have open tryouts? I think things are going to start back up, but not at their typical time frame. So it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I think this is obviously very positive news for people who are excited about getting back on the field. I have to say I'm like a little surprised that they're going to try to have YCCs. I thought that was one that was more likely than not to get canceled. But they're saying they're going to try to make it happen.
That event does stick out and was also a bit surprising to me. Not just because of the travel components of that. I mean, it's hard to have YCC as a regional tournament, but also because of the size and scope and scale that comes with trying to run the ICC event around YCC and the US Open. The number of people that need to be present to make a competitive elite tournament happen for youth, while also making an adult competitive tournament happen is really challenging. And for one that, I feel like it necessitates having national competition on both sides of that, the adult and youth sides. It's a pretty daunting task.
And I just think that the fact that if you're under 16 years old, you can't get a vaccine right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when that rollout's going to happen and how quickly it will happen. It seems like a stretch that it will be widely available by August. But on the other hand, you could restrict YCCs to 16 and up. You could, who knows what's going to happen with vaccine requirements, or how are they going to treat these events? What kinds of travel guidelines are going to be in place? There's a lot of unanswered questions right now that are going to be worked through. But at the end of the day, this is USA Ultimate signaling, hey, we're planning to hold events.
What was it? Green phase?
I think this is
we're not in full send.
Solidly yellow.
Yeah. I'm with you that I think that not all these questions are answered, but I just don't think it's reasonable to say we have to be able to answer every question in order to make any plans.
Impossible.
I think that paralysis was problematic for us.
Yeah, you have to plan to do it if you're going to want to try to do it. You can't decide in June that you're going to hold an event in July. It's not possible. So you have to plan now, and then their plan is 6 weeks before events, they're going to decide. That's enough time for people to still book flights and all that, all the other periphery things that you have to do to set up an event, but it gives people a sense of a timeline of when things are going to happen. So let us know your thoughts. deeplook@ultiworld.com, @deeplookpod on Twitter. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, Tim DeByle from the AUDL is going to join us to talk about their return to play plans and a lot more. So stay with us. It's Deep Look. Joining us now on Deep Look is the AUDL President of Media and Marketing, Tim DeByle, as well as the owner of the Madison Radicals. Tim, welcome back to Deep Look.
Hey guys, how's it going?
We're doing fine. Starting to feel the summery weather coming. Maybe summer's a little strong, but the sun is back. The warmth is back. It's going to be beautiful in New York City this week, and it's starting to feel like we're going to have some Ultimate again soon. And the AUDL has announced now that there's a plan for a full season starting in the first week of June. And I guess we wanted to have you on and talk a little bit about where things stand with the return to play conversation. So I guess the first question is, you've announced this June 5th date and plan for a season. What's your level of confidence that plan is going to go off and you're going to be able to execute what you've announced?
I'd say we're pretty confident. Obviously we're keeping an eye on vaccinations and number of cases of COVID and everything else, but I think there's just so much more science around outdoor activities and outdoor play right now that I think we just feel a lot more comfortable than we did last summer. As you know, we're kind of one of the only leagues, professional leagues, to not play last summer. We think that was a good decision, but we also think that right now that, as long as we're playing outdoors and when we follow the protocols we set up, that playing Ultimate should be safe to do this summer.
With how localized this experience of quarantine has been and dealing with the pandemic, how challenging has it been to get teams and organizations from various parts of the country all on the same page with how to proceed with the league this year?
It's been pretty challenging. You can imagine in the AUDL, it's always challenging to get everyone on the same page in anything. And so this is particularly difficult. You've got such a wide range from, Canada to California. Here in Madison, Dane County has had some of the strictest guidelines, throughout the pandemic. They had no sports played whatsoever, no high school, no grade school, nothing. And then about a month ago, they opened up outdoor sporting events, up to 100 players in any one space. So, they followed the science really closely. That made me feel good. I trust Dane County to be smart about how things are going. And, they've looked at the science and felt like outdoor play is okay. And so, I think we're going to follow that. And, across there's such a wide spectrum, right? I think, Texas and Florida have been open for quite a while for those things. That doesn't mean that we were open to play there. Obviously I think the risk profile and the the way that Ultimate players are treating this is a lot different than players from other sports. I think we talk about the kind of hibernation versus denial. Most Ultimate players fall on the hibernation side. I'm one of them. My family has been sequestered in our house for basically a year. We haven't been doing much at all, and I think that was the right thing to do. But I also think this summer that we're really hopeful that things are going to be a lot different.
I mean, we've talked about it on the show, a lot, going back months now, about the relative risk of playing outdoor Ultimate, and the reporting that I've done over the last month has made me quite confident that it can be done safely. I think the obvious challenge for the AUDL is all of the other logistics that go into having competition between two teams in different cities. It's not just the game itself. There's transportation, there's lodging, there's, meals. How is the league addressing that? Because that clearly is the challenge that the AUDL faces, and that any sort of national level Ultimate Frisbee competition is going to face as we come out of the, as we enter this sort of end game of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, so we have the AUDL COVID task force, which has some really smart people on it. 2 senior epidemiologists. We have the team physician for the Phillies and the 76ers. And they basically have told us that we need to start to think less about travel. I think there's this idea that travel itself is dangerous, and the reality is that travel isn't any more dangerous than anything else we're doing. It's just, you have to make sure you're doing it right. Like, airlines have been very safe generally. We obviously are going to try to do whatever we can to keep people limited by their travel. So, I mean, I imagine that at least what we're trying to schedule is that we're trying to keep, the matchups as close as we can early, so we can kind of see how things are going. I'm sure that it's going to be a lot of carpooling and driving versus busing. But I mean, we're going to kind of look and see where that stands. I mean, one of the things that we're doing is tracking how many people have been vaccinated and how many people have had COVID already across the league. And it's, pretty much running at about 30% right now. So 30% of players have either had the vaccination or have had COVID already. And the interesting thing about having COVID already is that our task force at least feels like we should treat them the same as people who have been vaccinated. So yes, you can get it again if you've had COVID, but you're just as likely to get it if you've had a vaccination. At least that's the thinking of our epidemiologists. So, like, for instance, my wife is getting the Johnson & Johnson's one this week. That's 75%. Like, according to our epidemiologist, if you've already had it, it's, you're more like 95%, right? It's more like the better vaccinations than the Johnson & Johnson one. Not that the Johnson & Johnson one is, super bad, but so we're tracking everybody who's had it and also everybody who's vaccinated as one pool. And so we're hoping we can get that number pretty high by the season, and that will kind of determine a little bit of the types of protocols that we use. I mean, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get on a bus by July. In Wisconsin at least. Our COVID rollout's been pretty good. I know that's not true everywhere.
You mentioned the COVID task force for the league and the protocols that are, it sounds like, somewhat tentative. These might be changed as the situation changes, as you actually approach competition. But what type of tools and are in place to help keep players safe and to keep those around players safe currently? What does the plan look like?
Well, I mean, I can start with, we started our ACN, which is our athletic care network, during the offseason. So every team now has a team physician, and it starts with everyone doing a COVID and health screening. So we basically have copied a lot of the protocols from NCAA. So, we're starting with let's take a look at whether they've had COVID and whether they're, what their risk level is if they were to get COVID, and make sure we understand that. And, the team physician is actually taking care of and thinking about that. And then from there, it's more about how you travel. It's, making sure that you're filling out the forms before practice around whether you've had exposures. And I think for us starting practices, we're going to be wearing masks. We're going to be making sure people don't carpool. We're going to be, making sure people spread their gear out. I mean, we're just going to be trying to follow all the best practices that we've been provided by the Athletic Care Network. But again, there's no magic bullet for this. This isn't going to be risk-free for anybody, right? There's always a risk in anything that you're doing that you're going to get COVID. If you're going to the store, if you're going anywhere, we think that the risk is going to be pretty minimal. And when we think part of that is by having our team physicians look at the risk profile of the players, we'll understand if there are players who are at risk. I know for me, one of my players, has some pretty bad asthma, and he's going to opt out this year still, even if he's vaccinated, just to be safe. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, again, I don't think there's any way for us to say, hey, this is an absolute risk-free thing to do. But, you start to weigh the risks. And I think a lot of folks who are younger have spent a lot of the time wanting to make sure that they don't get other people sick. And, as vaccinations happen, the highest risk pools are getting vaccinated first. So, we're hopeful by June that a majority of people pretty much anybody who wanted to get vaccinated who is at risk should be vaccinated. And beyond that most of the public who wants to get vaccinated will also be vaccinated. It's not entirely clear where that process will be across the entire country. And that's one of the reasons that Canada, we've kind of decided to have Canada run their own cup, because the vaccination process there is moving a lot slower. And even if the border is open, the players aren't as comfortable there that their friends and family are going to be vaccinated by the time the season rolls out. So, we just thought it was the safest move was to make that move now and make planning for the season a lot easier.
I mean, there are tailwinds for the return of Ultimate. I mean, we've heard from the Biden administration that the vaccine doses, there's going to be enough for every American by the end of May. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which you referenced, although it is a little bit lower in terms of its efficacy rate, pretty much all of the vaccines have had almost zero severe illness in any of the people who've received the vaccines. And I just saw a study yesterday that showed that one of the big concerns for athletes is if you've had COVID, does it cause long-term heart inflammation or damage that could then cause problems if you return to intense sport? And that study, which looked at professional athletes who'd had COVID, found that only 0.6% of the athletes had any kind of signs of significant damage in their heart, which is a very encouraging number. It's one study, so we can't say long for certain about how that works, but it seems that the risk is low for returning to athletic competition for those who have had COVID. I assume there's going to be screenings for your AUDL players if they have had COVID. That I think I saw in your return to play documentation.
Yeah, that's what I was saying with the team physician. Basically, we have a both a full health history and also a specific COVID one. And if there were severe cases, then they would have to meet with the physician and decide whether to do an echocardiograph. Sorry, I'm not I think that's the correct term. I've been involved in so I'm the only sort of non-physician involved in the COVID task force. Well, also Steve Hall at times. He hasn't, always been on every call, but so I feel like I've learned a lot, but I for sure am a bit out of my depth, and I don't want to act as if I'm a medical professional. But it's been really fun to hear them talk about it, and I think it really gave us a window into, at least from the two epidemiologists, of like an understanding of some of the things that are said and not said. Like nobody really talks about the fact that if you've already had COVID, that it's while there is a chance you can get it again, it's about as slim as if you've been vaccinated. And people aren't saying that, and I probably shouldn't be saying it here, because they want people to be vaccinated. They don't want people to feel like, oh, I had it, so I don't need to get vaccinated. So that's not a big part of the storyline. So anyway,
I don't really understand that, because like we understand how disease works. Like your body develops antibodies. Like that's the whole concept of vaccines. So if you've had the illness, you're going to have antibodies against the illness. Right. I feel like the media has done a horrible job throughout this whole process, because you've seen all these stories about, oh, this person got reinfected with COVID, but really that represents some tiny, tiny percentage of the actual population.
Right. But you can imagine that you don't want people who are, oh, I think I had COVID, so I'm not going to get vaccinated, right? I mean,
Sure.
I think just from a public health perspective, that telling everybody to get vaccinated and making sure that everybody is vaccinated is really important. I mean, obviously, a rollout would look a lot different if they were only hitting people who didn't know they had COVID. And also, I think the positivity tests are so poor that you don't also want people who tested positive who actually didn't have it to not get vaccinated. So I just think, again, I'm not a medical professional or anything, but I think that it makes a lot of sense just to across the board say, hey, you need to get vaccinated and move on.
What's the plan for fans at games?
So, that's a tricky one that we're still working on. I mean, right now we're just trying to get venues. So, that's been hard. You can imagine we're trying to squeeze 12 games into 12 weeks, which typically we have 12 games over 17 weeks. And there are a ton of venue issues, right? I know you just here in Madison with Breeze Stevens Field, they weren't sure if sports were going to come back. So they basically put some other events in there that they wouldn't normally do. Things like farmers markets and stuff like that they knew that they could get in there. And so, and this is happening everywhere. And a lot of like colleges, so like colleges in California, for instance, they're not even thinking about renting to outsiders right now because they just want to make sure their deal, it's not worth the risk to them. They just would rather deal with their own students and everything. So, there's a lot going on around that. But, I'm looking at my regulations here, and I think that we'll be able to have some fans at games this summer in Madison. Again, this is the optimistic side. I mean, assuming things continue to go well. I think we had 17 cases in Dane County, which is down from 1,000 or 500 at a time. So right now things, not only is the vaccination happening, but also just the number of cases are going down everywhere. And again, most of our stadiums are not full, and so 25%, 20% capacity in a lot of our stadiums looks, pretty close to what we might normally have. So I think, there's a good chance we'll have some fans in stands, and if not, then every game's available on AUDL TV, and we'll also have a Fox deal and potentially another deal happening. So I think our goal is we feel like it's really important to have a season at this point for the continuance of the business. And whether we have fans or not, we plan to move forward.
Well, look, I think the Venn diagram of people who would be at a farmer's market in Madison and who would like to watch an Ultimate Frisbee game, like there's a pretty decent amount of crossover there. So, I could certainly see the two meshing together
Marketing
pretty
opportunity.
Well. Yeah, exactly. What's the next checkpoint for the league? What's the next step in ensuring that things are going to move forward as planned? Well,
I mean, our sort of return to training plan is out there right now. And so teams are going to be able to start having practices and doing stuff, basically now. And I think we're going to keep a really close eye on that. And, we want to make sure that every team is taking it seriously. We obviously don't want to see any cases of COVID. And I think if we can show that, I think it will help everybody, right? So, if we're having practices, and again, like some of our protocols for practice right now is, drive yourself, don't carpool. We're not going to let people hang around, 6 feet apart when they're not on the field. Masks are very highly encouraged on the field. I think, for my team, they'll be mandatory. Not every team will it be mandatory. I think, there's some talk about teams in the hotter weather that maybe it doesn't make sense. But I think in general, we're going to find out. And if there's a lot of COVID cases, we'll have to rethink things. I suspect that we'll be able to do this safely and not have any COVID cases. But that's still my best guess. Again, based on what things look like outdoors. We aren't allowing any indoor practices or any indoor events currently.
So 12 games, 12 weeks, venue challenges, condensed season. What are the contingency plans if you have a team that can't find a venue?
Well, that we haven't run into that yet. So even in California, there are venues available, just not necessarily the preferred venues. So, we're actually in the middle of scheduling right now, and I think things are going pretty well. I think the hardest part is that we've got new folks scheduling. So like we have the Super Atlantic Division. So you've got
Right.
people who aren't normal, so you build relationships with your partners over time that makes scheduling easier because you can imagine it's a little bit of give and take on everything. It's not easy to put a schedule together, and this year is going to be particularly challenging. And then on top of it, you're throwing new personalities together. So I think we're comfortable that we're going to be able to get the schedule done. We have a good draft for probably a third or half the games already, and mostly it's about finding the Fox games and other games that we're going to kind of elevate, and then figuring out how to make those work. And then filling in around that. I mean, part of it is also like, I think everyone just understands that we're going to have to do more, have a little more flexibility as far as you might have to play on a Sunday, you might have to do double headers. We're going to have a lot more Friday night games this year, potentially a highlighted Friday night game every Friday. So there's a lot of stuff happening. A lot of changes as far as how we do things, and, mostly because of COVID, but also just we had, a year to think about things, and, we feel like, hey, let's make sure that we come out strong this year. So there's, I think we're going to have a lot of new stuff being announced in the next couple of months too.
New York and Boston got moved from their typical East to the Atlantic Division. So there's 8 teams in the Atlantic Division. The Canadian teams that are normally in the East are doing their own thing up in Canada. How are you going to do competitive balance in that 8-team division, given that it's not literally not possible to have a home and away with all the teams, given that there's only 12 games?
Yeah, I've seen the initial draft of the schedule, and everyone plays each other at least once, and then then there's other teams play each other twice, but nobody's playing each other more than twice. So it's pretty balanced. I mean, the good news is that half of the division will make the playoffs, so you kind of it's a little bit less important versus like in the West where only 2 of the 6 teams are going to make it. So I think there you want more competitive balance, but there's always been imbalance on the competitive side across the league based on travel. That's just been one of the things we've had to deal with, and owners, will always try to get it as competitive as they can, unless it's their own dollars, and then they'll realize that maybe travel costs should be more of a factor. So, it is what it is, but I think that Atlantic is going to be super fun to watch. I think there's going to be some really interesting games that we wouldn't normally have. I think we can all say that like in 2019, the New York Raleigh game was one of the best games of the season, and being able to do that again, I think is going to be exciting. And DC, Boston, New York, Atlanta is going to be really good this year. I mean, honestly, the Atlantic Division is up from top to bottom, is going to be more competitive, I think, than it's ever been. So yeah, I think we're going to be able to have a ton of good games out of that division.
Has the task force put into place what the plan would be if you did have positive cases or exposures? We actually talked briefly about this on last week's show in relation to USA Ultimate Club tournaments. But what would the league do if you actually encountered exposures within the league's pseudo bubble?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier for us because we have a week in between games. So if somebody's showing signs, they need to get tested. In that case, we would probably cancel those games from that week from any teams that were involved and look to reschedule them. So I think it'll look a little bit like college sports. We have the ability to have a full week in between games, and so we would think that either somebody would have symptoms or something that would happen that would make sure that we were able to catch it. But yeah, I think one of the things that's a lot different than other sports is that, especially college sports, is that they really do spend a lot more time together. They practice every day. They have film room. They have all that stuff. I mean, the reality is AUDL players do not spend a lot of time together. Most teams have one practice a week. Maybe they do a Zoom film session. Maybe they have a couple pod workouts, but it's a lot different than a lot of these other sports where these people are put together all the time. We think that that's one of the advantages we have, is that, you have a game and then you probably don't see each other until Wednesday, and it's for 2 hours and it's outdoors, and that's it. You aren't living in the dorms together. You aren't eating together. You aren't having, taking meals together. This is all stuff that happens in college sports. And they've still done, I think, a pretty good job of it. So, I really think that we're not going to end up seeing, I hopefully cross my fingers, any cases of COVID. But, that's no guarantee. And I think we'll see that happen, in the first 2 months here as we're at practice. I think if we can go through practices without having COVID, there's really no reason that we wouldn't be able to have games as well.
How is the business side of the league doing, and then maybe the teams as well? Given that you lost a year, now you face a year where spectators, which is the primary source of revenue for teams, is still a big question mark. Has there been some trepidation about having a bunch of games and having to cover all the costs of stadium rentals and travel, but not necessarily having a lot of guarantees on the revenue side?
Yeah, well, that's always a challenge, and this year, it's particularly challenging. Especially, 2020 teams lost money. Even though we didn't have a season, there were still a lot of things that happened. We still paid for insurance. They still paid employees that they had. They still, bought gear. They, there were, at least for me, I know, like we ran 2.5 months of training indoors. So there was definitely a negative year. And I think we all recognize that this year is going to be a difficult revenue year as well. But I feel like teams have been really good about it. I feel like there's a energy around, you're trying to get through this difficult times. In a lot of ways that brings you together, and it actually makes people less concerned about some of the stuff that they normally do. So I feel like there's actually a lot of positive energy around returning to play and getting back on the field, and just feeling like, okay, this is a particularly important year, and we understand that things are going to be more difficult, but there's also so many like good things happening around the league that makes us feel positive about the long-term trajectory. And so that makes people more comfortable losing money this year. If they didn't feel like we were going to be around in 2 years, they're not going to feel good about losing money. So part of that is just making sure that people feel good about the trajectory of the league. And I think, from my perspective, I left my very comfortable position at a business that I ran and started for 15 years in order to do this exclusively, which again, I think some people might think that's not the smartest move, but it just shows, I think, people that I feel good about where we're going. And, I see that across the league, that owners are more willing to put money up because they see that we have a good trajectory.
To what extent do you feel like this season will be an asterisk season?
I don't think it'll be an asterisk season exactly. For sure, you're losing the Canadian teams to the main series. They're still doing their own thing. For sure, there are going to be players who don't play. I would say, just looking around the league, players who are, under 27 are super excited to play. They are out there training. They're working really hard. I think players who are a little bit older, who know that it's going to be a grind to get back to this, and also know that 12 games over 12 weeks is going to be a grind, you may find aren't going to play. So I think that you'll see a lot less veterans and a lot more young players out there for teams. So, I don't think that's going to change the way we think about the season, but for sure it will feel like a different, it's going to feel different than what I would say a regular season, just because of the the kind of the compressed nature of it, and and just everything about it. I think following the COVID protocols and not being able to travel together on the buses and all that stuff, I think maybe may make things feel different for players, and the camaraderie that you get is going to be different. We're not going to go out to the bar after or any of that stuff. Maybe we will too. Maybe, if we're 95, 100% vaccinated by midsummer, then all this stuff doesn't mean as much as what I'm saying. So a lot of it is how optimistic you are. And, I don't know, Wisconsin, again, May, supposedly they're going to open up for everybody. And the one shot Johnson & Johnson is I think good enough for me personally. It's good enough for my wife, who's a teacher, who's getting it tomorrow. So yeah, I feel good about where we're going, and I hope we don't have to make major changes to the plan. Again, I think we all want to be optimistic about where the country is heading and where the pandemic will feel closer to over this summer, for sure.
The announcement about the league coming back in June also included a note that the championship game in September is going to be on FS1, not FS2, where the league's weekly games are going to be held. FS1, the second biggest sports cable channel behind ESPN. How did that come about? Will that be live? And what does this mean for a potential future for the media in the AUDL?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a good sign. I think when we first started this partnership last year with Fox, they said, "Hey, we want to test the waters. We're going to pick a night. We're going to play the games. We don't think that people who watch FS2 need to see this live. They're not going to be ultimate players. We want to see how it does." And we basically didn't exactly get to do that, but we did provide them with 16 games or 15 games that were recut last year, and they replayed those 65 times or 70 times. I don't remember the exact number. Yeah, there's a lot. So really, it was good for us, and they were happy with the ratings. And so when we started talking about what's the next logical step, they said, "Well, okay, let's try something on FS1." So we're going to do the championship game. It's not going to be live. It's going to be on Wednesday, and we're going to play the semis. At least this is the tentative plan. The semis on FS2, both of them pre that, and then switch over to FS1 for the championship game. So I'm excited by that idea. I think the other thing, like beyond Fox, so I mean, I think Fox is awesome for us, but we also have a lot of other things that happen during the off season. So we have a really good relationship with Eurosport India, where, I mean, this is, I forget what it's like 100 million plus households. So it's bigger than FS1. They loved our content and they want to do live games and replays this year. We're in talks with a variety of other properties around the world that we did our cut down series with last summer. And, I think we just see we're really bullish on the overall trend of watching the sport and the way we're producing it. And we think we're going to have deals in Latin America, Europe, and, potentially like the Balkans and stuff like that. So, for either live or replays this year. So, it's pretty cool. We're working with a bunch of different partners, including 11, which was, they did try to do something linear here. They got away from it. But they're still the company that brought the NBA to the world, and they're good at bringing new sports to new markets, and they're excited by Ultimate. So, I mean, I think to me, in a lot of ways, it's the Fox Sports stuff is really exciting domestically, but I think just worldwide, there's such a market for sports content and different, for whatever reason in India, particularly, like their viewership numbers were really, really good, and they're super excited about doing more. Some places it didn't work out for us. Russia, it turned out like they just had a hard time finding announcers, stuff like that. But places where they can use the English language, I think it's particularly useful. In India, they were able to do that without using local announcers. So, anyway, there's a lot on the media side that's exciting. And, again, this is stuff that will take 5 years, 10 years to really make a bigger deal around. But the fact that, people are being able to watch these games around the world on linear platforms is pretty neat to me.
I should have mentioned this right at the beginning, but it's your birthday, so happy birthday!
It is. Thank you.
Is there going to do something fun today? I know it's a little tough to still do fun things, but
well, my kids are making a cake for me, so that's exciting. And I think we're going to order maybe Indian. That's my exciting birthday.
All right.
So yeah.
Hey,
not much happening.
Getting
there.
Takeout is like going to a restaurant right now.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm on this podcast, so that was a great present for me.
Yes.
We're happy to provide.
How are you personally doing? I mean, you've spent a lot of time working on this league, but as you mentioned earlier, you've now gone full time and you're, fully committed to working in the AUDL at, probably some, I don't know, potentially some significant financial risk to, the next 10 years or whatever. I don't know how you see it, but how are you doing through the pandemic and through this crazy AUDL lost year and getting ready for 2021?
I mean, I would say that I'm been really lucky. I've been able to work from home. My kids have been going to school from home. My wife is a teacher. She's been teaching from home. So I actually have found myself to be able to reconnect with my family in a much better way. The idea of giving up a company that I built over 15 years was, I think, really hard for me. But the day after I did it, I felt so good because it was so much work. I was coaching the Radicals, running AUDL media marketing, running a 15-person marketing firm, raising 2 daughters. I was totally doing way too much. And I think the pandemic has, given me an opportunity to kind of reset my life in a good way. And so I've been, stuck at home and happier than I've ever been for a long time. And I think, I think the ability to just focus on the thing that you love, which for me is the AUDL, is, I don't know, it's just so much better than trying to do all these things while managing something that, I built and loved, but I also found myself looking over at the AUDL all the time being like, oh, what can I do here more? And I was doing a lot less. And I think that wasn't fair to my partner. I had a partner at Distillery who we started together. And, I don't think it was fair to him to focus so much of my energy on the AUDL either. So I think it works out for everybody. And yeah, there's always risk in doing something, but there was risk when I started Distillery. I left a good paying job to do that. There was risk when I bought the Radicals. There's, if you don't take risks, you probably aren't having a lot of fun in your life. So, you gotta just get out there and do it. I mean, you guys know you're starting, Ulti-World from were you right out of college, Charlie, or was
more
that
or less? More or less 1 year out
right?
of college.
I mean, that's right. So if you want to do something you love, you probably got to take some risks because most people aren't going to pay you to do that right off the get go. So, but yeah, I'm really happy right now, and it's obviously you feel bad for other people who haven't had it as well in the pandemic, but just for my personal life, I feel like I've been able to reset it in a really positive way, and I feel good about where things are for me.
Before we let you go, any announcements that we haven't heard about yet from the AUDL that are coming out anytime soon?
We hope to have a really big one in the next 2 or 3 weeks. A new partner for the season that is, will be a game changer for us, we think. So we aren't across that line yet, but we've been working with them for quite a few months, and we're really hopeful we'll be able to announce something for the season.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time on your birthday, and appreciate you coming on as always.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Tim DeByle, AUDL President of Media Marketing, here with us here on Deep Look. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Thanks again to Tim for stopping by. And Keith, at the end of the day, it feels a lot like the USAU situation, except maybe a little bit more under the control of the AUDL, given that they have these sort of individual games where they can say, you go here, play this team, then you go home. And, just as we've seen with other sports leagues.
Agreed. That's one of the benefits the UDL has in this situation is they have a format of competition and a scale that I think is a lot easier to manage. There's a more narrow group of stakeholders within the league that are easier to satisfy than, when you're a big membership organization that's led mostly by volunteers who are all over the country.
Yeah. So, again, I think so much depends on the trajectory of the next couple of months. Whether that June 5th date is realistic is going to be a big question. I mean, I do think it's interesting to hear kind of how much general optimism there is in the league just about the AUDL. and that owners are feeling fairly positive, even though like it doesn't seem like it's going to be a financially very positive year. I think you have to say that.
Agreed. And I do think that it points to, people have to have a long-term confidence, because this is an investment year, so to speak. You're taking a loss this year with the thought that there's a greater gain on the other end of this that presumably you're not going to see for a couple of years at earliest. So
discounted future cash flows.
Yeah, it's, this is a show of renewed faith, I think, on the part of ownership. Although I guess I can't speak to how tenuous those conversations may have been, how loose those threads may be. But there's enough there that owners are still on board, and that to me indicates that they believe in this for a longer term. And that's a good sign for the league. And I think it's a good sign for the community in general that both of these return to play announcements happened in such close proximity. To me, that implies a general change in how people are approaching safety and Ultimate in this coronavirus world. I don't think it's a coincidence that these announcements are happening close together, but they're not tied to one another. It's to the greater context happening around them.
Yeah. Well, give us your thoughts. If you play in the AUDL or you follow the AUDL, what do you think about the plan that they've laid out? Deep look at ultiworld.com, at deeplookpod on Twitter. That is going to do it for today's show. Definitely join us for our subscriber bonus segment where we talk about the Premier Ultimate League and increasing questions about what the league's plan is for the upcoming year, return to play, and some very unfortunate social media interactions over the weekend. So we will get to that in our subscriber bonus segment. You can become a subscriber for less than $4 a month at ultiworld.com/subscribe. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.